Hello everyone, welcome to this video lecture. So in this video, we are going to discuss about the process of fermentation. So now let's discuss about some basic facts about fermentation and definition of fermentation. So fermentation is defined as an anaerobic process in which energy can be released from glucose. So as we have discussed, it is an anaerobic process. That means that it can produce energy even in the absence of oxygen. It occurs in the yeast cells, bacteria, and also in muscles of animals, and also occurs in muscles of humans, and produce energy in the condition when oxygen is in short supply in human muscles. Now the term fermentation was first coined by Louis Pasteur in 1856, and he demonstrated that fermentation was caused by yeast. But later it is observed that there are different types of fermentation caused by different enzymes and different bacteria. The study of fermentation is called zymology. So basically the fermentation is the process where energy can be produced without the presence of oxygen with the process known as fermentation. So now let's start with the process of fermentation and steps of fermentation. So as we have discussed earlier, it is an anaerobic biochemical process, which means that it can be completed in the absence of oxygen. And with the help of this fermentation reaction, the two molecules of ATP are produced. And we know that ATP is the energy currency in our body, and it is needed for all the cellular functions to be completed. So the process of fermentation includes two steps, which are formation of pyruvate by glucose molecule, and then the pyruvate is further reduced to lactic acid, ethanol, acetic acid, and many other molecules. Now the formation of pyruvate by glucose molecules occur in the reaction called as glycolysis, which is also found in the cellular respiration, and this reaction completes in the cytosol of the cell, from which the 6-carbon molecule, which is glucose, is converted into 2 molecules of pyruvic acid or pyruvate, which are 3-carbon molecules. So this pyruvate undergoes into the reduction and forms lactic acid or ethanol and many other types of molecules. But in the case of cellular respiration, this pyruvate undergo pyruvate oxidation and converts into acetyl coenzyme and further take part in the citric acid cycle. Now let's understand the types of fermentation. So basically fermentation is of two types, which is homofermentation and heterofermentation. This categorization is based on the result of the fermentation. So in the case of homofermentation, only one type of molecule are produced in the result, and in the heterofermentation, more than one type of molecules are produced. Now let's understand the different type of fermentation. So there are many types of fermentation that are distinguished by the end products which is formed by the pyruvate. So the first type is lactic acid fermentation, where lactic acid is formed by pyruvate, and this pyruvate is produced by the glucose molecule in the process of glycolysis. So in this process, the NAD+ is generated from NADH, and thus it is also called as energy generative process. And the fermentation is catalyzed by enzyme named as lactic dehydrogenase. So the lactic acid fermentation is catalyzed by the enzyme lactic dehydrogenase. So this type of fermentation is also occur in the muscle cells of humans and other animals to meet their energy demands. As we have discussed earlier that it is an anaerobic process, so in the condition of inadequate oxygen supply or strenuous or physical exercises, the muscle cells also undergo the process of fermentation to complete its energy needs. So this is the overall reaction for lactic acid fermentation. Here we can see the molecule of glucose reacted with the presence of lactic dehydrogenase and form the molecule of lactic acid. So here this is the diagrammatic representation of lactic acid fermentation. So in this diagram, we can see the glucose molecule undergoes the process of glycolysis, and in this process, it is also an exergonic process which produces two molecules of ATP. And on the process of glycolysis, the glucose converts into two molecules of pyruvate, which are 3 carbon molecules. And these pyruvate molecules converts into molecules of lactate or lactic acid, which is known. So now the second type of fermentation is alcohol fermentation. In this process, the pyruvate which is produced by the glycolysis results into formation of ethanol or alcohol. It is the most important type of fermentation process, which is industrially very important and useful for many industries like beverages industries and yeast industries and many more. The alcohol fermentation consists of some steps. The first step is a pyruvic acid breakdown into acetaldehyde and carbon dioxide is released. And in the second step, the ethanol is formed by acetaldehyde. So it is two-step reaction, and the reaction is catalyzed by pyruvic acid decarboxylase and alcohol dehydrogenase. This is the overall reaction of alcohol fermentation, where the molecule of glucose undergoes the fermentation and molecule of acetaldehyde is formed by the process of fermentation and by the catalyzation of pyruvic acid decarboxylase. And further, the second reaction is catalyzed by alcohol dehydrogenase and two molecules of ethanol are produced. Now this is a graphical presentation of alcohol fermentation. So in this diagram, we can see the molecule of glucose undergoes the glycolysis process and converts into two molecules of pyruvate. In the second reaction, the molecules of pyruvate converts into two molecules of acetaldehyde and the two carbon dioxide molecules are released. And this acetaldehyde molecules undergoes reaction and converts into two molecules of ethanol with the help of alcohol dehydrogenase enzyme. Now, the third type of fermentation is acetic acid fermentation. In this process, the alcohol which is produced by the method of alcohol fermentation is further oxidized into acetic acid, and this process is completed by acetobacter bacteria. So here we can see the overall reaction of acetic acid fermentation, where the molecule of ethanol reacts with the oxygen and converts into acetic acid plus releases water molecules. The fourth type is butyric acid fermentation, where the sugar is first converted into pyruvate by the process of glycolysis, and this pyruvate is further oxidized into acetyl coenzyme A. Now this acetyl coenzyme A is further reduced to form butyric acid, and this reaction is catalyzed by enzyme oxidoreductase. So in this fermentation, this is the overall reaction where the molecule of glucose is converted into the molecule of butyric acid and two molecules of carbon dioxide and hydrogen atom are released. So in our previous slides, we have discussed about the types of fermentation and the fermentation reactions. Now let's understand the advantages of fermentation. As we have discussed, that it has the main advantage that it can produce energy in the absence of oxygen. But there are many other advantages of fermentation in the industrial field, like yogurt, soya sauce and cheese. All these products are formed by the process of lactic acid fermentation. And the alcohol fermentation, which is most common and most important type of fermentation, which has most widely used commercially. The alcohol fermentation is used for the production of different alcoholic beverages like wine, beer and many other alcoholic beverages, and also in the production of methanol and ethanol, which are used in the medical field and also in many cosmetics and alcoholic beverages. So beside all these advantages, there are many other advantages which use the process of fermentation. So for example, certain antibiotics and vitamins also use the process of fermentation for their manufacturing. And we know that the bakery or the bread production also use the yeast fermentation for their manufacturing. Also in the production of biofuels, the process of fermentation is used, and there are many products that like food, vitamins, pharmaceuticals or chemicals which are used or produced by the process of fermentation. So in this video we have discussed about definition of fermentation, different types of fermentation, their reactions and also different advantages of fermentation in commercial fields. So I hope you all have now understand the fermentation reactions and advantages of fermentation properly. Thank you.